Hello and good evening all. Thank you for joining us for a look at another fan-favorite GT1 that came about, along with several other notable 2000s and 1990s era GT1s, as a third-party passion project, this time motivated by Swiss constructor Maserati competition, apologies if I'm mispronouncing it, the Ford GT GT1. The base for the car, however, had nothing to do with Maserati, it was all Ford. Since the end of the GT40's racing development and competition entries by the early 1970s, the Dearborn Mark had made occasional attempts to keep the car's heritage alive, initially through the unsuccessful P68, then through authorized continuation models, which were essentially Ford-blessed replicas, and then with the GT90 concept in 1995. But no meaningful attempts were made to build an updated Le Mans Challenger, or a road car that would pick up where the road-legal Mark III GT had left off. In 2002, however, with the company's centenary coming the following year and retro styling la mode du jour, Ford got serious with designing a proper follow-on to their old Le Mans winner. This was first manifested as the GT40 concept that debuted at the 2002 North American International Auto Show, designed by Camillo Pardo with consultation from Carroll Shelby, and the car, now simply called Ford GT due to licensing conflicts, was authorized for production as a road-only car, with deliveries eventually coming in late 2004 for the 2005 model year. While the concept and production model both externally greatly resembled the original GT40, the new model was intended purely as a road car, and it shared no mechanical components, body panels, or underlying design elements with its predecessor. It was longer, wider, 10% taller, which is 4 inches for those of you who are mathematically gifted, had an aluminum space frame instead of a monocoque, modern Brembo 4-pot calipers, a 5.4-liter supercharged V8 from the current modular engine family that, when coupled with the Eaton screw-type supercharger, produced about 550 horsepower and 500 pound-feet of torque, which, in fairness, was not dissimilar to the power output of the Le Mans winner in 66 and 67, but this new automobile tipped the scales at almost 3,500 pounds, or 1,600 kilos, more than 1,200 pounds, or about 500 kilos, 550 kilos, greater than the 60s version. Nevertheless, performance was respectable, if not world-shattering, with a 0 to 60 time of 3.5 seconds and a top speed of 205 miles an hour, which was about de rigueur for the faster supercars of the day, and a production run of a whopping 4,500 cars was planned, which quite a substantial quantity, all things considered, although the price wasn't terrifically high, but it was either way a far cry from the 100 or so original GT40s and derivatives that were constructed back in the 1960s. But of course, we're here to talk about race cars, and in 2006, as Ford was winding down production of the GT road car, Swiss racing driver and entrepreneur Martin Bartek was establishing Maserati competition. Located in Niederwil, Switzerland, Maserati initially focused on parts distribution and support for other competition teams running Ford Mustang FR500 race cars in the FIA GT3 European Championship. Then, in 2007, Maserati secured the rights from Ford to develop a GT3 spec version of the Ford GT, which they took racing in the late 2007 season and for the full 2008 season, taking 6 wins from 11 events to clinch the championship ahead of an Aston Martin DBR9 run by Hexus Racing. The organization's competent handling of these projects apparently convinced them, perhaps with more optimism than pragmatism, that they could also develop a GT1 class race car based on the same architecture. For a small independent team to enter this particular arena was, to put it mildly, ambitious, but not entirely without precedent. ProDrive, for instance, had built the Ferrari 550 GTS without any input from Maranello, and their design had outlived the Ferrari-designed successor, the 575, which was, well, not very good. To be fair, that's actually the only successful example that comes immediately to mind, at least of the past post-prototype era. I may be forgetting one. Remind me in the comments. I suppose there are arguments to be made for some of the boutique manufacturers like Lister and Marcos, but even then, it's nominally a factory-supported thing.
Get on with it!
Anyway, Maserati set their sights higher much higher, with plans for a GT1 version of the car to compete both in the FIA GT Championship and hopefully at Le Mans. The transformation from road-going GT to Maserati GT1 was, by necessity, comprehensive. While maintaining the essential shape and proportions of the original car, virtually every component was modified or replaced entirely. The Maserati GT1 retained the basic aluminum chassis of the road car, but featured a naturally aspirated, rather than supercharged, 5-liter Cammer V8 engine producing approximately 600 horsepower, adapted to comply with GT1 regulations, and mated to a Hewland 6-speed sequential gearbox in lieu of the original manual. There was a completely redesigned aerodynamic package, including an enormous rear wing, aggressive front splitter, and various vents, ducts, and louvers to improve cooling and downforce for the car. The road car's aluminum bodywork panels were replaced with carbon fiber pieces that, in my opinion, and combined with the aero package, really do improve the car's already compelling looks. Center-lock wheels were substituted for the production car's 5-lug setup. There was obviously a substantially wider track and fundamentally revised suspension geometry, and stopping power came from carbon brakes with 6-piston calipers sourced from AP. The aerodynamic development was particularly extensive. Wind tunnel testing led to a fundamental redesign of the car's airflow management, resulting in significantly increased downforce compared to the road car. The massive rear wing was complemented by an equally aggressive diffuser, while the front splitter and various canards did further contribute to balancing aerodynamic loads. The development process wasn't without challenges, however. One Maserati technician later commented that the original road car wasn't designed with racing in mind, which is a euphemistic way of saying they had to re-engineer a lot more of the vehicle than originally expected to make it competitive, and even then. Reportedly, the cooling system was a particular bugaboo and required extensive rework, as did the electrical architecture. 2 cars were ready for the 2009 FIA GT Championship season opener at Silverstone, one run by Maserati and the other entered by development partner Mark VDS Racing Team, who were similarly newcomers to international motorsport after starting out in Belgian competition with a Gilet Vertigo as just Belgian racing. The 2 GTs qualified pretty much at the back of the GT1 grid on their debut, however, 10th and 12th out of 12 entrants. But this belies the rest of the entry list, which comprised of the full-fat Corvette C6.R GT1, the Saleen S7R, the Nissan GT-R GT1, which actually would get good points in Scrabble, because G's are worth, what, 4, 5? And the really not legal, but it got in anyway, Maserati MC12. The 2 cars did manage to finish the race and outlasted one of the Vitaphone MC12s as well as the Seoul Nissan, but that's about all that can be said for their debut outing, as they finished 8th and 10th overall and in class, 2 laps behind the winning Saleen S7R and the 6 top finishers. Throughout the 2009 season, the GT showed flashes of competency interspersed with the mechanical challenges that one might expect from a GT1 developed on a comparative shoestring. Maserati's participation was somewhat intermittent, missing 5 of the 8 rounds, but come 2010, the cars received a displacement increase to 5.3 liters for the inaugural FIA GT1 World Championship and the new 2010 GT1 rules, and they had planned 2 full-season participating cars, though this didn't come to pass for the first couple of rounds. Not to be outdone, the Mark VDS team did manage to campaign 2 cars for the full season, while 2 Maserati and 1 VDS car were also present at Le Mans. In the GT1 Championship, Maserati actually had a half-decent year, though they were never fastest in qualifying. Thomas Mütsch and Romain Grosjean took home wins at Abu Dhabi and Brno, and though Grosjean left the team halfway through the season, his replacement, Richard Westbrook, picked up the slack and helped Mütsch to 3 more podiums, granting Mütsch second in the Drivers' Championship, though they had little hope in the Teams' Championship with several retirements and DNSs from the sister car in what was fundamentally a 2-car necessary competition. They finished 5th overall for the championship, but VDS finished 8th after a fairly dismal season, highlighted only by 2 late-season third-place qualifying positions, one of which ended in a retirement during the race. Meanwhile, Le Mans that year, which was their only Le Mans outing, well, Qualifying went fairly well for the VDS and Matek cars, running second and third behind an Aston Martin DBR9, and warm-up actually had the VDS car topping the charts in class, which foreshadowed an early battle for the lead until a tire issue sent Bas Leenders in the VDS car into the wall in the second hour, forcing him to retire as the first of the three cars to leave the race. The first of the Matek cars, an all-Swiss, all-lady-driven entry with Natascha Gashnang, Cindy Aleman, and Rahel Frey, was out a few hours later, after 59 laps, with an engine fire. Finally, Much, in the remaining Matek car, had an early morning incident with a Pescarolo, and later retired with engine difficulties, ending the car's hopes for a finish, much less a podium. Not the hoped-for result for the teams, to say the least. Matek folded at the end of the year, citing financial concerns and selling their cars on to VDS. But, of course, 2011 saw the GT1 rule set drop from Le Mans eligibility, so Mark VDS Racing just entered their 4 cars in the 2011 FIA GT1 Championship, 2 under their own auspices and 2 under their original name, Belgian Racing. This year, the story was somewhat reversed. The GTs did much better in qualifying, taking pole in Abu Dhabi, the Sachsenring, and Ordos, but managed only 1 victory, again at Ordos, and all of these results came from the pairing of Maxime Martin and Frédéric Macavecchi. Several mid-season retirements meant that the number 41 car still wasn't able to contribute much to the team's championship hopes, but they performed better than any of the other entries, with the 2 Belgian Racing badged cars collecting 9 race retirements across 20 appearances, and the other VDS car fared little better, with the 2 teams finishing at the bottom of the team's championship rankings. That is, notwithstanding a Lamborghini team who dropped out after the 5th event. Having since passed into private hands, 6 of the 8 cars produced remain in existence, and they make occasional appearances at historic events. These photos come from 2023's Le Mans Classic, primarily in the EU as far as I've been able to discern. The cars represent one of the less successful, if no less ambitious, attempts by private individuals to turn their passions into performance, but without the backing and budgets of full manufacturer support, well, the results were rarely as compelling as the aspirations. As for the road-going GT that served as the GT1's foundation, it was, of course, replaced by a second-generation model that one could argue draws more inspiration from contemporaneous Le Mans prototypes than from the original GT40, but it did deliver on its design remit, to grant Ford a 50th anniversary win at La Sarthe in 2016, admittedly this time with the in-class asterisk. One might argue that this modern interpretation completes a circle of sorts, from race car to road car, back to race car again, but that final closing portion is a story for a different day. For this week's shameless plugs for other videos on the channel, we've previously covered GT1 as a class in DEF CON GT. We've talked about the P68 in a 5 Cars That video. The C6.R and Maserati MC12 have their own videos, as does the Ferrari 550 GTS and the Aston Martin DBR9. And I think that about covers it for this week. For our call to action not featuring the 3 sacred words of YouTube,
like, comment, subscribe,
I will just give everyone a reminder not to overcommit yourselves in pursuit of feeling preemptively busy in the future, as invariably once that future arrives, you're going to find yourself feeling overwhelmed rather than just busy. Anyway, that just leaves it for me to say, as always, thank you for your time this evening, or whenever and wherever you are watching, and I wish you all good night and a good tomorrow.